You. Our attendance seems kind of low, but maybe others will jump on as time goes. Okay, great to see everybody. Welcome back after a week's break. Now, ju in terms of our schedule, we have a little bit of an interruption because of the way I scheduled it originally. The next 2 weeks, I was going to be on the Temple Beth-El Israel trip, which didn't happen. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough people. So, but in any case, we will not be meeting for the next 2 Tuesdays. Our next meeting after this one is going to be on March 17th. So we have a little bit of a spring break in our semester. In between that, though, on this coming Monday night is Purim. So I hope you'll be able to come for Purim. And and then on this Thursday night, we have our winter concert performed by Michelle Citron. She's wonderful. And I know you will like her. I hope you can come to the concert on Thursday night. So that's just the housekeeping info I wanted to share. All right, so tonight is going to be our third and final session on the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides' seminal code of law. And then when we resume in a few weeks, we're going to be picking up with More Nevuchim, the Guide of the Perplexed. So tonight, our we're going to have a presentation on one of the readings from Phil Ross. Oh, but let's say the blessing before we turn it over to Phil. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so Dory, yeah, if we can spotlight Phil, there we go. All right, Phil, unmute and then you're up.
Okay.
There we go.
This article, written by Brian Stoller, discussed the history of codification of the Halakha law. A law code, however, is the exclusive source of the law, while Halakha, although containing certain features of a code, is rather a compilation of a vast living corpus of legal material. Various efforts at codification date back to the Geonic period, the period between the consolidation of the Talmud and the 11th century. These efforts were limited to enhancing accessibility and clarity to the halak material for the judges. Rambam attempted to codify halakha law in the 11th century, but as has been discussed in class, criticized for, among other reasons, his lack of sources and his belief that it was no longer needed to consult the Talmud. Rambam ended up creating a work that has been used by many as a companion to Talmud study. Others discussed in the article made attempts at codification, including Jacob B. Asher and Joseph Caro. Ultimately, in the 16th century, Jacob Caro's The Shulchan Aruch, building on the work of others, became the definitive halakhic code. It is seen as the best expression of the of the uh, of the vast halakhic tradition. As stated in the article, it succeeded because the Jewish world agrees that the Shulchan Aruch does the best job of curating, distilling, and honoring the many different opinions, arguments, debates, customs, and halakha opinions into a book that is clear, easy to understand, navigate, and to use, and enables a significant degree of uniformity in practical halakha while retaining a strong, intimate connection to the intellectual pluralism and genius of the past.
Very nice, Phil. Okay. That's a complicated topic, and my piece is I understand it's a little bit uh dense. I wrote that for my comprehensive exam in post Talmudic halacha for my graduate degree. Um, and I think you did a really nice job, Phil, of distilling it. Um, so we've talked in this class already about how Maimonides' project in the Mishneh Torah was to distill the halacha and systematize it so that it would be accessible to everyone and easily, navigable for Jews wanting to know what to do and how to follow the law. Also, his intent was that it would be usable by. Oh, where is Rabbi Stoller? Can you hear me? Huh. I hope y'all can.
Rabbi, I can hear
Oh,
you.
oh,
I
oh.
just want to
Sorry.
know where you are. I was just curious.
Oh, I'm in Dallas. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
figured it was Texas. Yeah,
Uh,
please go ahead. Yeah.
um, so he also intended for the Mishneh Torah to be used by judges. Now, in the medieval period, Jewish communities, lived in various countries under the rulership of a king, various foreign kingdoms. But the way that those kingdoms were organized was that subgroups, ethnic groups, religious groups had the ability to govern themselves internally. And so the Jewish community worked that way, where they had judges who adjudicated Jewish law for the community. Rambam wanted his Mishneh Torah to be usable as a basis for judges, halakhic judges, to make decisions. Ultimately, while the Mishneh Torah is incredibly valuable and foundational in the field of Jewish law, it's not the final word in codification. Um, that's because primarily Rambam does not show his work, right? And that was a deliberate choice on his part to create a code that's clear and definitive, but the problem is he doesn't say, and so said this, but there was a disagreement between these guys, and here's how it was resolved, and here's why, and everything. He's too clear and too direct to be accommodated by the Jewish ethos of multivocality, wanting to know the different opinions and tracing the lineage of the arguments. He doesn't do that. So the Jewish world ultimately doesn't accept his work as definitive. Phil mentioned that um, def- definitiveness is finally achieved by the Shulchan Aruch, written by Rabbi Joseph Caro. Maybe you've heard of Shulchan Aruch, maybe you haven't. It is regarded to this day as the definitive code of Jewish law, and all halachic decision making to this day will be done in reference to the Shulchan Aruch. It's not the only source that people will use, but it is the definitive one. You have to take into consideration and look first to Shulchan Aruch. Um, and the reason it's successful is that Rabbi Joseph Caro, author of Shulchan Aruch, um, kind of developed a formula to meet the various needs of the codification project in a way that was acceptable to the culture. And that is Shulchan Aruch, his work actually consists of two books. So His first book is called Beit Yosef. Beit Yosef is um, is a long form commentary on an earlier code of law, the Arba'a Turim. For our purposes today, it doesn't really matter what it is, but in Caro's time, a very important work. He wrote a long form kind of discussion of the halacha where he made rulings in there, but they're long essays where he explores the various sources, the differing opinions, and demonstrates why he reaches the conclusions that he does. That's what Beit Yosef is. Then Shulchan Aruch is like the Cliff's Notes for Beit Yosef. Okay, it's the bottom line points. He takes the rulings that he comes to in Beit Yosef, and then in Shulchan Aruch he just writes the bottom line. Here's the rule. Here's the rule. Here's the rule, like Maimonides does. But Maimonides didn't show his work. Caro does. So the formula that's accepted is this twin kind of works. One long form showing his work, and one a Cliff's Notes version that everyone can navigate. That's why Shulchan Aruch ultimately prevails as kind of the definitive code of law, because we Jews like to know where the different opinions come from. We like to understand the debates. We don't just want somebody just telling us the bottom line. Okay. You may feel that in your own life. And if you feel that, that's because you're the heir, in part, you're the heir to a tradition that really emphasizes um, debate, discussion, multivocality. Those are important values in our tradition. We're not dogmatic. Rambam was too dogmatic in his code, and that's why it wasn't the last word as he hoped it would be. So, all right, any questions about that before we move into our text? Adam, yeah, unmute there.
Did Caro use Rambam as one of his sources in the Shulchan Aruch?
Yes. Yeah, Rambam is one of the three major halachic sources that he used in rendering his decisions. So Caro's decision-making process is also different from Rambam in the sense that Caro's process is more mechanical, whereas Rambam, knows all the sources and he's considering everything. He writes rulings. He doesn't tell us how he gets there, but from, students of his work can say that there's some subjectivity. He's just, using his own kind of reasoning and so forth in a lot of cases to arrive at conclusions that aren't readily, apparent from the earlier tradition. Caro doesn't do that. Caro uses a mechanical process where he said, and he tells you this at the beginning of his book. Here's how I make my decisions. So he says, I look first to what he calls a Beit Din. A Beit Din is a court. We've talked about that before, a panel of three authorities. He says, um, I look to a Beit Din. The first Beit Din that I look at consists of three authorities: Rambam, um, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who was a major Sephardic a halakhic authority in the 11th century, and the Rosh, who was a German Ashkenazic authority in the 12th century. So Caro says, I look to those three on a question of halacha. If there's a clear ruling, like there's two of them, two out of the three say X, then I go with X. Okay. Or 3-0. I follow the ruling of the Beit Din. Then he says, if the ruling of that first level Beit Din is not clear, I go to my second level Beit Din, which consists of five. And I can't remember off the top of my head who the five are, but he's got five scholars who he looks to, and he follows the majority of them. So Caro's rulings are much less subjective and self-generated than Rambam's are. Okay, it's mechanical And in that way, people can have faith that Caro is not substituting his own judgment for the judgment of the authorities that came before. He's following them.
But Rambam is using his own judgment. So if he's not using his own judgment and somebody else is not using theirs, you still don't have a judgment.
No, yeah, Rambam follows the earlier authorities, but
It doesn't say who they are.
he doesn't say who they are, and you don't know exactly who he's following, and you don't know, or at least he doesn't make it obvious that if he rules a certain way, that if he's disagreeing with somebody or not, you don't really know. Caro makes it clear at the outset how he's reaching his rulings. So people who are following him can have confidence that this wasn't Caro just substituting his own kind of subjectivity. He's following this formal process of how he's reaching his conclusions. Okay, which gives him greater credibility. Now, Rambam is one of those authorities. And that's the importance of Rambam. Is by Caro's time, you can't make halachic decisions without consulting Rambam. But he's one of the three in the first order Beit Din for Caro. Okay, good question. Other questions?
iPhone has their hand up.
iPhone, go ahead.
Okay, it's Naeem.
Hey, Naeem.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's interesting that he actually drew from an Ashkenazi source, whereas it seems like, okay, if you're in the Sephardic world, it's all the furthest north you're going to go is the south of France, and then if you're in the European world, you're pretty isolated. So that's interesting. Number one, but number two, how come Rav Yosef Karo didn't get an acronym? Didn't get how'd that happen?
He actually does have one. It's just not very commonly used. His acronym is Maharik, Morenu Harav Yosef Karo. But our teacher, Rabbi Yosef Karo, but I don't know, people just don't tend to use it very often. He's just Karo. Yeah. But getting an acronym is the measure of a highly regarded scholar.
Right.
All right. Other questions before we get into our text for tonight? Okay. All right. So tonight we are going to read Mishnah Torah, dealing with laws of war. So I brought this for a couple reasons. So the first reason that I want you to see it is because together these three sessions on Mishnah Torah, I wanted you to get a sense of like the scope of Rambam's code. Now you can't get a sense of the full scope in the three sessions, but the first one we studied conversion. The second one we studied Purim. Tonight we're going to study the laws of war. I just mean this to kind of show you that Rambam's code is all encompassing. There's no aspect of Jewish life that he does not codify, which makes the Mishnah Torah unique in terms of its scope. Codes that were, the earlier efforts at codification that Phil mentioned after the Talmudic period and before Rambam were not as comprehensive as the Rambam, and then later codes, including Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Karo, is not as comprehensive either because the Shulchan Aruch only codifies laws that are applicable in Caro's time, meaning the Torah has all kinds of mitzvot that pertain to the temple, sacrifices, and the agriculture of Eretz Yisrael. in the medieval period, when Jews, when generally speaking, the Jewish world is no longer in Eretz Yisrael. There's always a small community there, but the center of activity and center of Jewish life is in the diaspora. Those mitzvot pertaining to temple and sacrifice and agriculture in Eretz Yisrael are inoperative. They only apply in Eretz Yisrael at a time when the temple is standing. So Yosef Karo, for example, follows a common practice in the field of codification of saying the all of those laws that deal with temple and sacrifice and Eretz Israel stuff, um, they don't apply in our time, so I'm not going to spend my time codifying it. There's no point. Whereas because his project was, I need to create a code that people can use in their lives. Rambam, by contrast, is also living in diaspora, and all of those laws are inoperative in his time. But Rambam codifies the whole thing. He's got all the laws of sacrifices codified. He's got all the laws of agriculture in Eretz Israel codified, all the laws of the temple and the priesthood and everything that is of only theoretical relevance in his time, he still codifies it, which makes the Mishnah Torah the most comprehensive code of law that there is. Okay. Why did he do that? Well, he knew that all of that material was not pertinent to Jews in his time, but remember he names his book Mishnah Torah, which, as we talked about in a couple of sessions ago, the meaning of Mishnah Torah means repetition of the Torah. So he wanted his work to be all inclusive of the Torah in its fullness and its full development, so that this would be the only thing you'd ever have to look at again. Okay. So I wanted you to see, I brought this section because I want you to see these laws of or the fullness of his work, and these laws that we're going to be reading tonight, the laws of war, are not operative in Rambam's own time. Okay, this is all theoretical because it imagines or it codifies the laws of a sovereign Jewish state under the kingship of David's descendants, which is essentially the Messianic era. So that leads into the second reason that I want you to see this text is because this literature, precisely because it's inoperative in real life, is literature of a different kind. Whereas the conversion laws and the Purim laws are practical and implementable. You know, a person who's going to go through conversion or is going to go through observing Purim, you look at it and you have to act it out. These laws are in dialogue with real life. The laws here in pertaining to war are not in dialogue with real life, and in that sense, they have a not only a theoretical character to them, but a like an otherworldly character to them. They're and fantastical, and we're going to focus on that as we read it. And this is really important, not only to understand Rambam, but to understand the kind of um, condition of Judaism and Jewish law pre 1948. Okay, 1948 is a watershed moment, of course, in Jewish history because of the establishment of the State of Israel. Not only because it gives, you know, Jews a sovereign state for the first time in nearly 2 millennia, but because it brings into play aspects of Judaism that have essentially been dormant or uncultivated with real life for nearly 2 millennia. The Jews, who now have sovereignty in the land of Israel, have to deal with things about governance, maintaining an army, running, exerting power over citizens um, and people under, military jurisdiction, and all the kinds of things that come with running a state. They have to figure out how to do that as Jews in a way that's faithful to our tradition, but in dialogue with a tradition that hasn't dealt with those things in 2,000 years. And you'll see that as we read this, that because these topics were not cultivated forged in the crucible of real life, they have an unrealistic and fantastical kind of flavor to them. Okay. And that's fodder for good discussion, I think, about the realities of Jewish life today. All right. So that's a lot that I just gave you, and it deals with kind of a lot of like theoretical stuff. What questions do you have about what I've said? That's clear to everybody? I can't see you. I just see the text. Dory, do you mind just pulling the text down for a second? I want to see faces so I can see if there's puzzlement and perplexity on faces. Len is giving the big 2 thumbs up. It's all clear. Yeah. David, okay, you have a question. Go ahead, David.
Would the Israeli court system today use Maimonides as the basis for ruling on actions taken by the IDF?
Good question. So I don't know very much about the inner workings of the Israeli judicial system, but I think that we can say that the Israeli judges do look to this literature because the Israeli legal system strives to be a modern expression of the Jewish legal tradition. But it is important to note that modern Israeli law does not consider itself or call itself halacha. The term for modern Israeli law is mishpat ivri, the law of the Hebrews. Okay, which is different because it draws on the same literature, but the judicial system of Israel is not saying we are rendering halakhic decisions. It's not a religious enterprise. Halakha is religious law. The law of the state of Israel is not meant to be religious law, even though it is informed by the teachings of Rambam and Karo and all of the sources. So, and then at the same time, there is a parallel system of halachic courts in Israel that do explicitly see themselves as creating halacha. So Israel is very complicated in that way. That's about as far as I can go in terms of speaking knowledgeably about it. But these questions about, the IDF, how is the IDF conducting, war and its policies and whatnot? Would those legal decisions be reached in consultation with the rabbinic sources on war? Definitely. Definitely. That's an important source for them. It's just not the only source.
Thank you.
Okay. Good question, David. Adam, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. I guess just reflecting on what David said, that basically these things are not hypothetical anymore. They're real now.
Right.
So that although, as you say, it's in a fantastic world or whatever, no more. You
Right.
decide, does it apply to today?
Yeah. That's right. And so Rabbi David Hartman, who was died just within the last few years, a really important modern pluralistic modern Orthodox philosopher, the founder of the Hartman Institute in Israel. He wrote about this. He named it the Zionist Challenge. And what Hartman meant by the Zionist Challenge is that now, because Jews run a sovereign state, we have to figure out how to enact the teachings of our tradition, the principles of our tradition, um, in a modern state, in ways that honor the teachings of the Torah. But we have to figure out how to do it because nobody's been thinking about that for 2,000 years. They've been thinking about Purim and conversion and tefillin and the ritual stuff, but they have not been thinking about how to enact statecraft in a Jewish way. And that's the Zionist challenge that Hartman identifies. Naeem, you had a question?
Yeah. So when they talk about, so up to the founding of Israel, was the concept of the Messiah, when people thought about it, was okay, Messiah is going to come and the Davidic line of monarchy is going to be reestablished?
Yes, exactly. So what Maimonides is writing about here is essentially a messianic state. Like ha, how will Jewish how will a Jewish kingdom, and how should a Jewish kingdom, whenever one exists, conduct itself?
Will
So
the
he's
yeah.
not speaking about messianism in the sense he's not talking about the Messiah. He doesn't say when the Messiah comes that he should do this. He talks here about a Jewish king. What does a Jewish king do? How does a Jewish king conduct war, etc. For he knows that that's a theoretical condition, but he's writing about when and if such a condition obtains, this is the law. Okay.
Is the Messiah himself supposed to be part of the Davidic line, or is that a
Yeah.
separate person?
No, the Messiah is part of the Davidic line. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into the
Dorothy
text
has her
now.
hand up.
Oh, Dorothy. Okay, Dorothy, and then we're going to read the text. Go ahead, Dorothy.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to add that to the question about the IDF, that what did impact a lot of the thinking about what's Jewish in time of war, besides going to the Torah, was comparisons with what happened in Germany. That there was this whole concept of, you don't have to follow an order. You don't follow an order if you think it's an immoral order. And you do give opportunity for people to escape. All of those things were new, I think, and were influenced by the Holocaust and the beginning of the state of Israel.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, so let's look to the text. That we're going to start in chapter 5 of the volume of Mishneh Torah, called appropriately the laws of kings and their wars. Um, so let's start at the beginning of, yeah, there we go. Okay. A king should not wage any other wars before a milchemet mitzvah. Okay, let's translate that term. All right, so you recognize the term mitzvah, which means what? Someone call it out.
Good deed.
Okay, in this case, it's not a good
No,
deed.
it's a commandment.
Commandment,
Commandment.
exactly. Okay, and milchama is the
War.
first word, war. Okay, so milchemet mitzvah is a commanded war, a war that is commanded by God. Okay, a king should not wage any other wars before a milchemet mitzvah. What is considered as milchemet mitzvah? The war against the seven nations who occupied Eretz Yisrael, the war against Amalek, and a war fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them. Afterwards, he may wage a milchemet hareshut. Okay, so you probably don't know that term, reshut, but let's see. What milchemet mitzvah is a commanded war. What would you infer that milchemet hareshut is?
Beginning war?
Not, I see why you came with like Roche, but no, it's not that.
An optional war?
An optional war, a discretionary war. Okay, a war of discretion. So afterwards, he may wage a milchemet hareshut, that is, a war fought with other nations in order to expand the borders of Israel or magnify its greatness and reputation. So in this first halacha, we're learning a lot about how the Torah, how the halacha views war. The first thing is that there are these two broad categories: milchemet mitzvah, commanded war, and milchemet hareshut, discretionary war. The Torah does command war. Now that might seem counterintuitive to our thoughts about Judaism. And we think about Judaism as emphasizing peace and being a religion of peace, which of course it does in so many ways. But as Rambam tells us, there are certain wars that the Torah says we Jews have to fight. War against the seven nations, when they're going into the promised land, you're going to go in, you have to conquer the people that live there and establish a sovereignty. So that's a milchemet mitzvah. And then war against Amalek. Amalek is the tribe of people who in the Torah during the wilderness wandering, Amalek ambushes the Israelites from the back and kills a whole bunch of people. Amalek it becomes the embodiment of evil, and it is a mitzvah, one of the 613 commandments to fight war against Amalek. Um, we're coming up on Purim next week, and Amalek is relevant to Purim. Why? What's the connection between Amalek and Purim?
Haman is a direct descendant.
That's right. According to the our tradition, Haman is a descendant of Amalek. So he is the latest, and in the biblical literature period to seek the destruction of Israel. Amalek kind of becomes a symbol of the evil incarnate that wants to destroy us. So Amalek might extend to you know like Hitler and so forth. Although but that's the idea, and it is a mitzvah to fight against Amalek. And then the third category of Milchemet Mitzvah is really important to the halachic theory of war. What do you see there in that the last clause in that first paragraph? A war fought to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them. What does that mean?
Self-defense.
Okay, self-defense. Um, yes. So Rambam is telling us that a war of self-defense is milchemet mitzvah. It's obligatory. You have to fight that kind of war. Now, what questions does Rambam's statement of that halacha raise for you? If you're going to enact this as policy, what do you need to know about whether, whether a war that such and such a state, that the Jewish state is considering, getting involved in or fighting is meets Rambam's definition of milchemet mitzvah?
Does it
How do
sound
you,
like
what
Go ahead.
exactly is self-defense? What counts as self-defense?
Good. That's a good question. Okay, what counts? Now he's told us that he's defined it as assisting Israel from an enemy which attacks them. Okay, so that tells us something on its face. He tells us that there an attack. There has to be an attack on the Jewish state, right? An enemy which attacks them. How do you define that? What constitutes an attack?
Murder.
Any thoughts on that?
Invasion across borders.
Okay, breaching of borders could be. Yeah. What else?
I think the threat of attack is also something that gets interpreted.
So that's a really good question. Okay. Is the threat of attack meeting Rambam's definition? Of course, when did this arise in the history of post 1948?
67 war.
Right, 1967, where the armies, the Arab states, I think six of them or so, right, were seen to be amassing their airplanes and weaponry and so forth for an attack on Israel. They did not launch an attack. Israel acted first, preemptively. So there's a question, and there was a question then about preemption. How does halakha think about preemption? Okay, because Rambam says to fight, to assist Israel from an enemy which attacks them is amassing your planes on the border with concrete movements or detectable movements of planning an attack count, or does Rambam mean that milchemet mitzvah doesn't kind of take effect until an attack is actually launched? Okay, so Dory says there's hands. I can't see any hands. I just see the text. Maybe you can put the text down,
Okay.
Dory.
Yep, no problem.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Let's see. Hands up. I see David. Go ahead, David.
Well, in the case of 67, we have to remember that the Egyptians had closed off the Red Sea and access to a lot, and there had been, 20 years of attacks across the Jordanian, Syrian, and Egyptian borders. So I I I I would have judged it as um, not a full preemption. But we have to remember he wrote this right in the whatever 12th century, 11th century,
Right. 12th century.
right,
Yeah.
where um, gathering troops and coming across borders would have taken weeks, months, etc. Not today, where an intercontinental ballistic missile takes 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um, the the thing that strikes me is the word from an enemy which attacks them. So
Yeah.
how would you judge a country that attacks Israel that hasn't been considered an enemy of theirs, right? So Chinese cyber attacks through the internet, using focusing on pro-Palestinian and pro-Iranian stuff,
Yeah.
you know, are they an enemy?
Well, I think when Rambam uses the term enemy, he means like somebody who's attacking you is an enemy,
Right,
right? But you're highlighting things that point to the Zionist challenge, which
right.
is that the laws of war, as they're codified in in rabbinic literature, don't contemplate things, of the modern era. Why? Because they never had to, and they're frozen in time. So, the major enterprise of the modern state of Israel is to consider these things and then try to think about like, okay, had Rambam, what are the principles underlying the tradition that can inform our decision making, recognizing that as a secular, Jewish state, we're not governing our country by halacha, but we are governing it by mishpat ivri, the legal tradition of the Jews. Okay. Lynn, go ahead.
So a couple of things come to mind. One of them is that, at least in our own country, we're seeing the idea, the definition of an attack, be increased wider and wider.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden, immigration is an attack. All of a sudden, um, you know, the saying the wrong thing on a social media is an attack.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an infinitely widening mandate should you choose to do that. So that's
Right.
the one thing. And the other thing
Yeah.
is there's also sort of proxy attacks that Israel has not felt necessarily the need to respond to for a very long time, like, through funding terrorism and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Israel has responded in proportional attacks, whatever. Um, it feels like in the very complicated world that we live in the polyvocal, you know, global capitalist world that we live in, there are so many venues through which something can be interpreted as an attack, and then it's how do you judge?
Yeah. It's right. So we have to know how Rambam is thinking about what an attack is. He doesn't say. Okay. And that's a good point. Attack can be defined very broadly or very narrowly or somewhere in between. Part of this, I actually wrote my rabbinic thesis on this question. And the material is fascinating. Rambam's not the only one that writes about it. And there are a lot of different opinions, within the halachic tradition about how to define um, an attack. Some very like narrow, some much broader. And you have to ask, the question is like, okay, what is the attitude toward war that the tradition has? Remember, Rambam is telling us here that these are the criteria. He's telling us when he's talking about defending against an enemy that attacks you. He's saying that falls into the category of milchemet mitzvah, a commanded war, meaning when you said, Len, like Israel has chosen not to respond, that milchemet mitzvah doesn't allow for that. Milchemet mitzvah means it is a mitzvah, a commandment to fight war. Okay, so so that's coming into play here. Is the tradition telling us that it's a commandment to fight war when an attack is imminent but hasn't happened yet? Does it command us to fight war when, there's like any gradation of whatever, of attack. One thing that can be helpful, and that I did in my thesis, was look at this material kind of in conversation with just war theory, which is, a contemporary secular, way of thinking about the ethics of war. And how can the ideas developed in just war theory help us understand Rambam? And maybe he doesn't always agree with them.
Control what?
So
I'm a screen. Today work.
yeah, okay. So
The light of what?
Dorothy, yeah, go ahead, Dorothy. Let's
Thank you.
mute.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Am I muted?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So if somebody says, I am coming to kill you, believe them? If you believe them, then this is a just war, because that is a clear and present threat to you.
Well, at what point does it become that? So that's a question in just war theory, and it's a practical question for every day in Israel. If somebody, if like there are many, Palestinians and jihadists and whatever out there who say like death to Israel. Does that constitute an imminent threat to Israel, such that Milchemet Mitzvah is triggered?
Well, if they attack, isn't it?
Well, if they attack, but so that's the thing. But what if they're just in the streets shouting death to Israel? Is that a threat that requires a response? So let's go back to the text, because I want to look now that he introduced the second category. The second category is Milchemet Hareshut, discretionary war. And he gives the example of, wars to like expand your territory, which is basically just a king, like, wars of conquest. You want to get more land or whatever. Um, and he says a king can fight those wars too. It falls into the category of Milchemet Hareshut. All this is important because as we go through here, Milchemet Mitzvah and Milchemet Hareshut have different kind of ethics and rules surrounding them. Okay, so a big question, like when it comes to something like the Six-Day War, is not so much like should Israel, or should Israel fight it? The question is, in fighting it, what kind of war? Which category would that fit into? Because the different categories demand different things. Okay, so let's move on to number two. He says, there is no need to seek the permission of the court to wage a milchemet mitzvah. Go down to 2 pages. Yeah. No need to seek the permission of the court. That's the Sanhedrin to conduct milchemet mitzvah. Rather, the king may go out on his own volition and force the nation to go out with him. In contrast, he may not lead the nation out to wage a milchemet hareshut unless the court of 71 judges approves. Okay, this is the first major difference between the two categories, and it has to do with checks and balances, as it were, on the king's authority. Okay, in waging war. Milchemet mitzvah, the king needs no additional authority. Why?
Because it's a commandment.
Correct. His authorization is explicit from the Torah, right? He's commanded to do it. Milchemet HaReshut is different. It's a discretionary war. It's not that such wars are prohibited. It's just that for the king to act on his own discretion, he requires an additional outside authorization. The Torah/God has not given him the authorization directly. So the halakha establishes the Sanhedrin as the second and necessary authorizing body. Okay. Let's see. Was there a
So,
question?
yeah, Dr. Karen has her hand up and Sue asked a question in chat.
Okay. So Sue says, consider the first commanded war against the seven nations. Commands initiating war. Is this justifiable? Yes. The answer is yes. Why? Because God says to do it in the Torah. Okay. So a milchemet mitzvah, which is explicitly said, do this, is pre-authorized. It's already, you have to do it. Whereas a discretionary war, so the example Rambam gives is to get more territory. Okay, that's not commanded in the Torah. It's allowed, but only if it goes through the proper authorization process, which includes the approval of the Sanhedrin. The king can't wage the war on his own initiative. Karen, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Kind of pondering how much of the Rambam's writings were shaped by his own history of exile and wandering and persecution of his times. Of course, I still find this, commandment, do not allow a soul to live.
Oh, we haven't gotten there yet.
I
Yeah,
know,
but
but
yes.
I read it. It's a summation of, what
Yeah.
it's just
Yes.
so harsh. It's so without any compassion.
Right.
I'm having a hard
That's
time,
true.
that the family, everything they had to live through to survive, to shape this strong a conviction that this negative commandment still holds so strong.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. All right. So we're going to read a little more in this
Adam has
chapter.
his hand up.
Oh, Adam. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and before we talk about enemies attacking us, it talks about the seven nations who originally occupied Eretz Yisrael. We could attack them without having them attack us.
That's right.
So, in other words, just by virtue of their being there,
Yes.
we have Torah authority to kick them out of there.
And not only authority, but a commandment to do it.
So basically, that refers to what's going on in the West Bank and Gaza.
Well,
We have the authority.
so in modern Israel, I mean, these issues, have been and continue to be debated amongst like rabbinic authorities. With respect to kind of war against, the Palestinians and Hamas and all that stuff, which categories do these fall into? Because religious scholars who want to, advise, the government or, their people in the IDF, whatever they want to know it for, they want to be informed by these by the halacha. So you have to know, is war against Hamas milchemet mitzvah, or is it milchemet hareshut? And these issues they're not easily, classified. Like there's a lot of legal details, because the halacha with respect to war is somewhat conservative when it comes to waging war. You see that in the category of milchemet hareshut, not milchemet mitzvah, because the Torah says very clearly, God says it, this is a command. But for other kinds of war, the halacha is quite conservative about it. So let's see how that plays out. Number 3, the king may burst through the fences surrounding the fields or vineyards to make a road, and no one can take issue with him. There is no limit to the road the king may make. Rather, it may be as wide as necessary. He need not make his road crooked because of an individual's vineyard or field. Rather, he may proceed in a straight path and carry out his war. Scroll down a little bit to the footnote story, if you would. I want to look and see number 14. Rashi. Uh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So I guess this is in the conduct of war generally. It doesn't say specifically with respect to Milchemet Mitzvah. All right. So, wage the war to win. Number 4, it's a positive commandment to annihilate the 7 nations who dwelled in Eretz Yisrael. As Deuteronomy states, you shall utterly destroy them. That's the divine authorization right there. The command, do it. Anyone who chances upon one of them and does not kill them violates a negative commandment. As Deuteronomy says, do not allow a soul to live. The memory of them has already been obliterated. Okay, so this is really harsh and evil stuff. We read, those of you who took the anti-Semitism class, we read literature from medieval Islam and medieval Christianity that, also struck us as like, wow, this is like really intense or really violent or harsh. Um, and we were reading, we weren't reading Jewish literature in that class, but in this material, you see it in our own tradition. And I think it begs the question. And it's the Zionist challenge. It's what's playing out now since 1948, which is to figure out when Jews do have state and military power, um, do we institute things like this, or is this relegated to the realm of the theoretical only, like forever? See, for Rambam, it's just in the realm of the theoretical because there is no practical realm for it to be enacted. So for him to say, wipe them all out with no mercy, and it's like, okay, so I'll say it. Like, we're not going to do that because there's no way for us to do it anyway. But when you have real power, what do you do with this kind of stuff? This stuff is in our texts. Rambam is right in quoting the Torah. This is what the Torah says. So it presents an ethical dilemma in the age of sovereignty. Any thoughts? I want to get somebody who hasn't talked yet. Galaxy. Can't tell who you are, but who is
Oh,
that?
no, it's Bob,
Oh,
Rabbi.
Bob. Hey,
Yeah,
hi, Bob.
I think, what I start to think about is the state and Maimonides law, but also how there are individual groups that take some of these words and justify also what they might be doing in terms of annihilating another human being.
Sure. I mean, look, you could imagine, and it wouldn't be far-fetched for somebody to, look, the enterprise of interpretation is about making meaning, right? And interpretation is a creative process. So someone could come along, and I think they have, maybe they haven't won the day, but to come along and say Hamas is Amalek.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That like Hamas meet like everything that Amalek did, in the Torah, they ambushed them and the Israelites in the wilderness. They attacked the vulnerable and the defenseless and killed them. You could say Hamas is Amalek. What did they do on October 7th? They ambushed the civilians at the music festival and in the kibbutz. They attacked the weakest, the most vulnerable, and slaughtered them. They are Amalek. And if you classify Hamas as Amalek, well, the Torah tells you what to do with Amalek. Wipe them out. Show no mercy. And that's a plausible reading of the tradition. The question is that now, okay, now in the age of sovereignty and military power, is that a reading that we want to adopt? Because you can definitely make the case for it. And in Rambam's time, he's like, yeah, so what? Say it. Like, no one's going to act on it anyway. I think in Rambam's time, like had Hamas, had October 7th happen in Rambam's day, he would have been like, the Torah says, like, go slaughter them, show no mercy, leave nobody standing, all that, because he knew that it wouldn't really matter. It's venting. A lot of this literature is venting. But now it's different because it's not just venting. We have real power. Okay. So is it responsible then? Is it ethical to classify Hamas as Amalek?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So then if we say yes, then the halacha is clear about what you do with them. And then are we comfortable with that? Because Rambam told us, quoting straight from Deuteronomy. Well, let's go back to the text.
Jerry has her hand up and Dorothy as well.
Okay, but I just want to go back
Okay.
and read the text.
All right.
Thanks. Right. So it says to destroy anyone. Go to number 5. Similarly, it's a positive commitment to destroy the memory of. It's going to be Amalek. I think. Scroll down. The memory of Amalek, as Deuteronomy states, obliterate the memory of Amalek. It is also a positive commandment to constantly remember their evil deeds and their ambush of Israel to arouse our hatred of them. As Deuteronomy states, remember what Amalek did to you. The oral tradition teaches, remember with your mouths, do not forget in your hearts, for it is forbidden to forget our hatred and enmity for them. And then the halakha, he may deal with it in the next chapter, but the halakhic literature is very clear about the mitzvah to essentially commit genocide against Amalek. There should be no more of them. So if Hamas is Amalek, or the Palestinians are Amalek, or Islamic Jihad, whatever, that comes with halakhic ramifications. Jerry, go ahead.
I thought one of the reasons that the very ultra-Orthodox and Hasidic people don't want to participate in the army was because the state of Israel was not created at the time of the coming of the Messiah, and therefore this form of governance and this form of war is unethical.
Yes, that is certainly a view held by some, and that kind of viewpoint on Israel, on the state of Israel, let's say like held by the Satmar and other communities like that, would say that what Rambam is talking about here is not the state of Israel. It's a different form of governance. It's a different spiritual condition. It's a different, cosmic condition, and this doesn't apply. And and so then once you say, okay, this doesn't apply to the modern state, which I think is, in my opinion, is accurate. I think this doesn't apply, although there are, there's if you look in my book, if you have it, there's an essay by Rabbi Mark Wachowski who talks about how religious scholars in the state of Israel are kind of dealing with that question. But if you say this doesn't apply, that Israel is a regular state like the United States or any other country in the world. Then there are differences of opinion in the halacha about um, what a regular state can do in respect to war. And one viewpoint that's articulated by Khatam Sofer, who's the father of Haredi Judaism, says that war in any normal like state is prohibited to fight any kind of war except a defensive war in response to a direct attack. That's it. That's the Khatam Sofer that says that's the only kind of war that's legitimate. So he's very, very conservative about fighting war. And under his viewpoint, even like something like the Six-Day War would be a no-go because the only kind of war that can be fought is in response to a direct attack. Others say that are much more, lenient about it and say that these laws don't apply. And there's one, the Netziv, a Lithuanian 19th century scholar, who said that the laws of war in the non-messianic or Davidic king time is governed by a passage in Genesis after Noah. It just says, it essentially says, like in war, war is war and you just have to fight it and do whatever you have to do. So it ranges really far. Okay. All right. I want to move to the next chapter now, to chapter 6. And he'll get more into detail these two categories. Number 1, war, neither a milchemet hareshut or a milchemet mitzvah, these wars should not be waged against anyone until they are offered the opportunity of peace. As Deuteronomy states, when you approach a city to wage war against it, you should propose a peaceful settlement. Okay. That is great, right? That sounds wonderful. Don't always exhaust diplomacy, right? Like offer peaceful settlements. Let's settle this peacefully and not fight war. That's a requirement. But then, of course, the first statement invites the continuation, which is, what does peace mean? Okay, so Rambam says, if the enemy accepts the offer of peace and commits itself to the fulfillment of the 7 mitzvot that were commanded to Noah's descendants, let's go scroll down. None of them should be killed. Rather, they should be subjugated. As Deuteronomy states, they shall be your subjects and serve you. If they agree to tribute, but do not accept subjugation, or if they accept subjugation, but do not agree to tribute, their offer should not be heeded. They must accept both. The subjugation they must accept consists of being on a lower level, scorned and humble. They must never raise their heads against Israel, but must remain subjugated under their rule. They may never be appointed over a Jew in any matter whatsoever. The tribute they must accept consists of being prepared to support the king's service with their money and with their persons. Can you scroll down, Dory? Thank you. For example, the building of walls, strengthening the fortresses, building the king's palace, and the like, as First Kings relates. This is the tribute which Solomon raised to build the house of God, his own palace, the Milo, the wall of Jerusalem, and all the store cities which Solomon had, all the people that remained from the Amorites, upon them did Solomon lay a tribute of bond service until this day. In contrast, Solomon did not make bondsmen out of the children of Israel. They were men of war, his personal servants, his princes, his captains, the officers of his chariots, and his horsemen. Let's read the next one also, number 2. In the settlement he offers, the king may propose that he is entitled to take half their financial resources, or he may propose to take all their landed property and leave them their movable property, or to take all their movable property and leave their land. Okay. So this is there's a lot to talk about here. Um, all right. What do you see going on here in Maimonides' halacha that a peaceful settlement must be pursued before war can be waged? What do you see?
Len has his hand up and then Adam.
Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
So one thing I see is a sort of power reversal fantasy
That's exactly.
of imagining that they are the people um keeping their thumb on whoever in the real world the Jews' position is in the Christian and Islamic world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we saw that actually. Like, does any of what he says does it remind you of anything else that we've seen?
Um, in your class on anti-Semitism, the rules about a Jew not being to have a position above, and well, I guess it was in the Arab world. So an Islamic person, those were exactly the same. Those were exactly the same sort of restrictions they were living
Right.
under, and that I guess Maimonides had been living under.
Yeah, exactly the same. It's some of it is identical to the Pact of Omar, which was the governing like terms of Jewish life under Islamic rule, and also in the La Siete Partidas, the law code of Alfonso X in Christian Spain. So yeah, I think Lynn, your take on it's like a reversal. I mean, that's the fantastical nature of this because, and it's not only Rambam, it's writing it. He's codifying, Talmudic material and everything. But this arises out of a culture that it lives in subjugation to others and lives, with these kinds of rules. And so you can say like, well, you imagine them saying, that this body of law here, the laws of kings and wars, is like, what would it be like if we were the ones in charge? What would we do? And you can fantasize about that
We would
and
kind of
make,
suck.
yeah, because yeah, like now it doesn't get put into practice because we don't control anything. But yeah, the sentiment is there. It's like if we were in charge, we would do this to them. Now, does that just reflect like a consciousness of being a dream or a fantasy that everyone kind of knows would never really happen? Or does it reflect a vision of like someday we're going to be the ones in charge and we're going to do this? I don't know. But to whatever extent we were shocked and appalled by the Pact of Omar and La Siete Partidas, all for good reasons, it's also here in our own literature. The only difference is that we never got to enact it.
We got two
Um,
hands up, Adam and
okay.
then name.
Okay, Adam, go ahead.
Yes, I mean before we had genocide, and now looks like apartheid.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
basically,
subjugation.
and this is clearly what is feared, that if we do take over Gaza, that there will be an apartheid situation there.
Yeah, so right. So how does this look then? I mean, let's say you're an Israeli policymaker and you're making policy in light of many different considerations, but also in conversation with Mishpat Ivri, the legal tradition of the Jewish people. And you say, like, well, Rambam here says that it's very clear when a Jewish state is waging war against an enemy, a peaceful settlement is preferable to waging war. But the peaceful settlement is not like some kind of happy, equal situation. This is abject subjugation of the opponent, forcing them to pay tribute, forcing them to live by the seven commandments of Noah, forcing them to be, in servitude to the king and build up his palaces and all. I mean, like, this is pretty, harsh stuff. And that's what peace is in this vision. That, I don't know how that like factors in for thinking of contemporary Israeli policymakers. Maybe it doesn't at all. Maybe they say like this is a fantasy. This is not what the kind of, dynamic we want to have with our, in the world. But it's certainly what Rambam is talking about. Now, there's another element of this. Oh, Naeem, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, to answer your question, the peace would be basically victory without fighting.
Yeah,
And basically on a state to state level, it would be basically this foreign state would be a vassal state,
right.
which is what I mean. I think Rambam was thinking about ancient Jewish history where I think the Hasmoneans did have vassal peoples. I don't know about a vassal
Mhm.
state, but they did have vassal peoples.
Yeah.
And then when Solomon's kingdom split into the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, those kingdoms eventually did become vassal states of the Assyrians
Mm-hmm.
and conquered by the vassal state of Babylon before the first temple was destroyed. So this is probably what was on his mind, but also what was on his mind on a state to state level.
Yeah, definitely. And it reflects the world in which this material is developed, right? A world of kingdoms, a world of, vassal state, nations and people paying tributes to the king. And like this is not reflective of the world today, in the same way that it was reflective of the Middle Ages. So, but that again is the Zionist challenge because this is all we have, up until 1948. This is all we have. Since there was no opportunity to develop it differently. Um, we as contemporary Jews, I think you just have to kind of look at Israeli policymakers and say, like, to what extent does this can this be adapted or regarded as relevant to our world and to give expression to the kind of relationships that we seek with our enemies, with our friends, with our neighbors, with our, whatever. There's another aspect to this which I want to point. I want you to notice, um, and it continues on, which is the Rambam does not contemplate um, the uh, the Jewish uh, state losing. Okay, so here all of this halacha says you go to fight them, you offer them the peace. Here's the terms of my peace. You're going to accept everything that I want. You're going to be subjugated to me. You're going to pay me tribute. You're going to follow my rules. You're going to be my servants. If you don't agree to that, I will come in and wipe you out. And there is no contemplation of any kind of resistance, which obviously is ridiculous. There makes no sense. It makes no sense. Why do you think he writes it that way? Why doesn't he come in at all and say, like, entertain the possibility of being defeated in battle?
because it's never going to happen anyway.
Possibly.
It's unrealistic. It's just fantasy.
Yeah, so possibly. So on the fantasy level, it's like, yeah, of course we're going to win, because it's our fantasy. But I think there's something else too. It goes back to the authorization process. We scroll down. Let's see. Dory, I want you to scroll down a little more if you would. Um, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Where is it? Wait, pause, pause, pause. No, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, is that the end?
It's the end of the page, under the document.
Shoot. I might not have given you this part. All right.
Would it
Well,
be available in Sepharia?
It is, yeah,
If you
available.
have, give
Sorry,
me
I
the
thought.
how to find it, what the term is, if you know where the reference
Well,
thing is.
try. Let me. We only have 4 minutes, so let me just summarize it. The part that I was looking for that I may not have included there is more detail about authorization. So remember, we saw he said the king fights Milchemet Mitzvah on his own volition, but for Milchemet Harishut, he doesn't. Can't fight it without the authorization of the Sanhedrin. Um, there's a part in Rambam where he talks about in the time of the first temple period. There was another thing that was destroyed before the second temple period, which is called the Urim and Tumim. Urim and Tumim are in the Torah. They're oracles, uh, like the magic 8 ball. The magic 8 ball. It's like, am I going to be rich? And you shake it, and it says like, yes, likely, or what. So that's like an approximation of ancient oracles. The Urim and the Tumim were these oracles that were on the breastplate of the high priest. Um, and the oracles are used to consult God. Okay, so the high priest would essentially be able to go to God and ask God, a question. And then God would answer through the Urim and Tumim. Now, the Urim and Tumim are lost after the destruction of the first temple. And in the second temple period, there is no more. But Rambam talks about when in the time when the Urim and Tumim are available, the king has to consult them before waging Milchemet Harishut. Okay, when there's no Urim and Tumim, he has to consult the Sanhedrin. But when there is Urim and Tumim, he has to consult them, which means what? He can't go to war unless he gets the authorization from the Urim and Tumim, which means what?
From God.
From God. That
Yeah.
God is telling him specifically, go ahead with this war. Okay.
Yeah.
So the implication of that is that with Milchemet Mitzvah, the king has explicit authorization from God through the Torah. With Milchemet Hareshut, the king has explicit authorization from God through the Urim and Tumim, which means that as far as Maimonides is concerned, did you found it here? Yeah, in chapter 4. Sorry, I didn't give you the chapter. But this means, as far as Maimonides is concerned, the halakha is set up such that war will never be waged without the express authorization of God. And if God is saying go for it, what does that mean?
You have to go for it.
Well, you have to go for it, but what if
You
God is
can't
going to tell
lose.
you
You
you're
can't
not going to
lose.
lose? Exactly, you're not going to lose. Okay, so I think that's borne out in other literature that I use in my thesis. That Maimonides doesn't write about losing in war because, as far as he's concerned, you will never lose because you're going to war with the explicit green light of God. And when you think about it that way, this is why, like the Khatam Sofer, the father of Haredi Judaism, who I told you about before, says that absent this governance structure with the king and all, and that is contemplating a regular state can only fight a war in response to a direct attack. Because Khatam Sofer knows that without the express permission of God, you can't fight war. Think about that as a theology of war. That's a very, very conservative viewpoint on waging war, which isn't practical in the modern world. Okay, so these are ideas underlying these texts. Rambam doesn't contemplate losing because you would never lose if God is on your side. But how can you be sure? The only way you can be sure is through the Urim and the Tumim, or the Sanhedrin, who's like the closest approximation you could get, or the Torah itself. Without that, Hatam Sofer says no war. And what does that mean for a sovereign Jewish state that's informed by Mishpat Ivri? Or you have the other extreme, which is the Netziv that I mentioned, which is, hey, absent, this governance structure, we're governed by the Genesis thing, which just says, like, when there's war, it's war. You do what you have to do. And that's a big, ethical question, that's very much alive today for, not only for Israel, but for all countries. All right. So we're going to stop there at 7:33. So if you want to read more Rambam, I encourage you to do that. The rest of it is very interesting. And as Dory pointed out, there's also chapter 4, which I didn't give you. To look at about this subject. So we're off now for the next 2 Tuesdays. We resume on Tuesday, March 17th with the Guide of the Perplexed. Phil, thank you for your presentation. If you could email it to Judy, that would be great. She'll send it out to the group. And hope to see you all Thursday night for Michelle Citron's concert and Monday night for Purim. Thanks, everyone.